thank you all for coming to the August meetup for Any Tech. This month we've got Mr. Phil Johnson doing a talk on using chatbots with Facebook Messenger. I'll hand over to him in a bit, and he can explain all the details on that. First, just want to run through a few different things. So first of all, if you have any questions for us, then we're on pretty much every single social media website out there. We also have recently just opened a Discord chat, so there is a link there. I know that's quite hard to remember, but if you go to the website, then in the banner at the top, you can click a nice, easy link which allows you to join there. So any questions for either myself, Mark, or James, or Phil, then we can hopefully answer your questions. Equally, if there's anybody, or if you'd like to speak at Any Tech, or there's anybody in particular that you would like to see speak at Any Tech, please do get in touch, and we can definitely kind of chase down people and see if they would like to come and do a talk here. As always, big thanks to our sponsor, Scott Logic. Yeah, without those guys, then we wouldn't be here. Usually, if it's kind of a face-to-face meetup, then we'd have beer and pizzas. But on an online meetup, unfortunately, we don't have that luxury today. But yeah, big thanks to those guys. So without further ado, Phil Johnson, I'm going to hand over to him. He's lead front-end software engineer at BGL, and he can talk to you about chatbot engines with Google Dialogflow. So over to yourself, Phil.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks everybody for coming along. I'll start sharing my screen now, which I think will cut yours off.
I expect it, will they? There we go.
Cool. Brilliant. So yes, so as Chris mentioned, this session's called Automate Yourself, and it's about how to use Google Dialogflow to set up a chatbot agent. And I'll go through wiring that up to Facebook Messenger and show something wired up to Facebook Messenger. But as you'll see when I go through the session, there are a lot of other integrations that you can add on top of Google Dialogflow. So yes, as Chris mentioned, I'm Phil Johnson, lead engineer for what we call the front-end community at BGL. And by front-end, we mean kind of our website, so anything that sits on top of our API layer. So a lot of C#, ASP.NET MVC websites, and the UI side of that as well, so the HTML and the SAS. And the community that I lead also implements some of the things that our agents use in our contact centers. BGL itself is a company, not too many people have heard of BGL, but they're quite a large company. There's two main divisions there. One is an aggregator division, which is comparethemarket.com is our biggest brand in that space. And our other division, the one that I work in, is called IDO, which is Insurance Distribution and Outsourcing. And we essentially do white label insurance websites, so where people can buy and self-service their insurance policies for really big high street brands. So your big supermarkets, banks, car breakdown services, that type of thing. When you go onto an aggregator like Compare the Market or one of our competitors, and you type your stuff in and you get a list back of links, there could be 10 or so of those links that are actually coming to BGL's websites to buy or manage insurance policies. So I'll talk a little bit tonight about automation, I guess. So we'll have a little look at why would you want to automate anything. People that are along this journey at different stages. So yeah, some people are well into automation and have done quite a lot of it. For some people, they're looking at what they can actually get started doing with it. We'll have a look at what is Dialogflow. And we'll look at a chatbot agent, and like I say, the example that I've got is wired up to Facebook Messenger. It'll show you how you can wire that up to other things at the same time, as well as being wired up to Facebook Messenger. And we will have time at the end for questions and further discussion, but if people do want to shout up during the session, especially with the number of attendees, you know, if you do have any burning questions or you want me to change a setting and see what happens, then just shout up, you know, and we'll see what we can do. So if we get started, so why would you want to automate something? So the big point, and I guess the reason why most people want to automate something, is it frees up time. So it can free up your own time if there's something that you're doing that's repetitive or you're constantly being asked for the same thing. It can free up your own time. It can also, you know, it can free up, if you're a leader in an organization or you have a team or something, it can free up those people to do other things. It reduces the key person dependencies. So if you have one person who normally does something, if that's automated, if they can automate that, or if you can automate it, then when that person goes on holiday, you know, the automated bot carries on working. It never goes on holiday apart from having to restart it for upgrades and things. It's very repeatable. So it's the same thing kind of every time. So it's very reliable. And it's scalable as well. So when you think about things, you know, things like opening hours, you know, if people ring up a contact center like BGL, we have contact centers. We have agents who are dealing with calls and with people who are typing in to website agents as well. And that we only have so many people. So the more that we can automate at BGL along those lines, the more that it can scale, and the more we can have those people looking into other things, or the more actual customers that we can deal with the same amount of people. So the next question after why you'd want to automate, I guess the next thing you're going to want to consider is what would you want to automate? So common tasks or questions are the first sort of port of call, really. So when we talk about common questions, things like, you know, what are the opening hours, whereabouts do you have offices? For us in the insurance industry, some of the questions are things like, you know, I've got this policy, the number is such and such, and I want to know how long it runs for. Or for car insurance policies, you know, what are the named drivers on this policy, that type of thing. Common tasks, it could be deploying software, it could be something that you know that you run, some computer software that you run that does a process, that type of thing. Data requests, so again, things like, you know, someone's got a tracking number or a policy number and they want some data about that. Event-driven tasks, so things like alerts, you can have automation wired up to your alerts for your software. So when your software is running, if it hits a certain alert level, you know, you can have that create an incident in your system and create incident tickets and create conference bridges and email people and pages to get people involved, that type of thing. And so anything that's a workflow, really, and you're going to want to look for things that have a varied range, so but a known range of responses or decisions when you're looking at that workflow. Things that aren't great to automate, and I say they're not great to automate, but actually this you know, this world is getting better all the time. But at the minute, I think anything really requiring human traits is difficult to automate in a good way. So things that require people who do emotional tasks. So things like counselors, you know, if you're giving somebody emotional counseling, you know, they might not respond as well to an automated counseling service. Trust consideration tasks. So anything where, you know, and don't get me wrong with fraud and things, obviously with AI, there's a lot of data involved, and, you know, AI can be very useful in some ways, better than humans for some things, but for some things where it's a case of, you know, you're looking someone in the eye and you're looking to make that personal judgment on whether you think they're telling the truth, you know, and it's not just the content of what they're saying, but their, you know, how they look when they're saying it and that type of thing. Robots are getting better at that, but yeah, there is a human element to that that can be good. Academic or creative review or creation. So what I mean by that is articles, essays, you know, news, and paintings, you know, both the creation and the review of that type of thing. Automation is getting better in creating news articles in the sense of pulling things together from like social media and aggregating that into an article that makes sense. And sometimes it is quite difficult to tell if it's a robot that's created that stuff or a human now, but it's still not quite there. I think there's still improvements can be made, and I'm sure they'll make them. But certainly for things like paintings and stuff, you know, judging whether a painting is good, you know, you can automate kind of compositionally. Does it have these things in, and does it have something in the center and stuff? But actually looking at something like a painting and telling if it's good, or actually creating a painting that is compositionally good and everything, can be harder for a robot and easier for a person to tell when it's not a person that's done that. And any tasks that are unique, so like I said before, for workflows and things, you're really going to want to look for things that have a range of possible responses or decision tracks to go down. What's not great is when that the response or the action from something is unique every time. That's just very difficult to automate. So if you have a look at Dialogflow, which is one of the tools that we can use for automation, and the tech stack's very big when it comes to automation, and in reality, you're probably going to have more than just one thing in that tech stack. But Dialogflow, so I think Google make Dialogflow, and they basically describe it as a natural language understanding platform. It's very easy to design conversational user interfaces. And if you've got applications, so websites where you've got like a thing that pops up, say, how can we help you, that type of thing. Anything where you've got conversational, either textual conversation or voice conversation, Dialogflow can be integrated into those applications. At BGL, we used digital voice in our customer service centres. So as I mentioned before, we have agents working in customer service centres, and they're dealing with people ringing up, and they're dealing with people typing into those types of chatbot things or chat things that you have integrated into websites that you know, can I help you, can I answer any questions. We use it for gathering common info, so things like, you know, name, policy number, things like that, before someone's kind of gone through to an agent. And we use it for taking card payment info. So one of the big things that we're doing with it at the minute is for PCI compliance, and this is a really big thing as people have with the pandemic, as our agents have started working from home where they never did historically. We've now got this position for payment card industry compliance, PCI compliance. You know, if the agents are on calls using their computers where, you know, people around them could hear this stuff, their teenage kids could be in the background kind of writing down details, you know, anything like that. So this is an area that we've really had to really had to look at in depth as people have, as our agents have started working from home. So what we have is now, when a call gets to the payment card info point, the application that the agent's typing into knows it's at that point, and it automatically transfers the caller onto a chatbot agent to take the card payment details. And then, you know, if it's a recurring payment, that we're going to store those details that'll all be done through the automated agent, and the actual agent never even hears any of that. The call recording stops at that point, and it all goes to the automated service, and those details are taken, and either the payment's taken or we store those details if it's a payment that the person is saying that, you know, they want us to store those details for a recurring payment. So let's take a look. You've probably seen enough of me talking about this stuff. Let's have a look at an actual chatbot agent. So first thing I'll show is how to wire it up. So first thing you're going to do if you're creating this type of thing is you're going to have a Facebook page, because we're integrating with Facebook Messenger. Like I say, we'll have a little look at some of the other things that you can integrate with. But the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have a Facebook page, and you're going to create a Messenger app that is that you're going to wire up to that page. So this is in Facebook developers page, and it's under a thing that I've called autofill. So I've called all of this thing autofill, just as a name for the chatbot agent. So my screens have just gone off and they're coming back on now. Cool. So yeah, so this is a messenger app. First thing you've got to do is wire it up to a page and give it some access tokens. So if we add the autofill page, so I've called that autofill as well. So I've added the Facebook page to this messenger app. And that means we can generate a token from here. And anyone who's done much in the way of integration, things like webhooks and access tokens and secret keys and things are quite common mechanisms. So we grab a token from here, and in Dialogflow, we create the agent. I just have to make that smaller and maybe put in there. So in Dialogflow, we have to create a chatbot agent, and if we come into integrations, and I'll just quickly show the Facebook Messenger how that's wired up. So the page access token that we create in Facebook for the page, we copy from there where we generate it, and we put that in here. And you can see here, Google Dialogflow will give me a callback URL, and there's also this verified token. So the verified token is something that it's basically just any text that you want to put in, and it's so that, you know, these things are also that Facebook Messenger knows that it's you that kind of owns both of these things, or, you know, you control both of these things and you want them to talk to each other. The callback URL is something that we put in here back in the Facebook Messenger thing. We put this callback URL in here, and this is how Facebook Messenger knows once the message comes in from Dialogflow. This is where it'll send the response to, and the verified token, like I say, is just a random string that you come up with yourself. One other thing that you need to do is, for the webhook, you need to have 2 subscriptions going. You've got to have messages and messaging postbacks, and that's so that in Facebook Messenger we can actually have the messages coming in, and we can subscribe to the messages that are coming out. So that's pretty much it for Facebook Messenger. That's all we have to do. What I'll show you before we actually get into Dialogflow itself. So this is the actual chatbot agent that we'll have a look at. So you can see here I've typed in hi, hello a few times, and it's actually repeated that quite a lot. But you can see here, the first one I've typed in hello, and I've got hello, how can I help you? I've then typed hello further down, and I've got hi, how are you doing? So this is one of the kind of tricks, I guess, that that's really good practice. So it makes people feel less like they're talking to a robot if they type in the same thing a couple of times and they get a slightly different response. And similarly, if you can have the person type in the same things in different ways, and you deal with it kind of with the same intent as Dialogflow calls them, that can be really good practice. It can make people feel like it's less of an automated kind of service that they're talking to. But for the purpose of this, so the chatbot agent that I've got created here is a very simple thing where it's going to find out what meetups a user is interested in, and it's going to gather some of their information so that at some point, you know, whoever owns this agent could kind of send out details for the next meetup of that type. So if you have a look, and if we say what meetups do you run? So this is a user asking it a question, and you can see you get the 3 dots where it says the person that you're talking to is kind of typing in. And one thing that's worth mentioning here as well is, so this is an actual Facebook Messenger for an actual page. So if you own that page, you can actually go in and respond to actual people. So if you wanted to go in and pick up where the agent's kind of left off with a person, you can do that. But yeah, so the response here when we ask about meetups is, we run some awesome meetups, which one are you interested in? And then it gives me some options. So a couple of simple options: tech, data, or other. So we're interested in tech here, I guess. So we select tech, and it says, thanks for your interest, message me with OK when you're ready. So basically this could be one of those things where it's like, you know, you're going to need your bank card, message me when you've got your bank card there. So if we message OK, so it's asking me what my name is. So let's go for Phil, and it's going to ask for my email address. So let's go for an email address that is not mine. So if anybody is watching the recording and harvesting any information, you will not reach me at that address. So now I get a message back, and hopefully you can see in this, it's actually reflecting back the things that I've said. So it says, thank you, Phil. So that's something that I typed in kind of previously. For your interest in our tech meetups, that's going back a couple of messages ago. So it can remember that we typed in tech a little while ago. And it says, we'll email you at my email address when we announce details of our next one. So you can see there, it's actually gathering the user's information, and we can include that in the responses that go back. So let's have a look in Dialogflow, and we will see how we do that. So this was setting up the Facebook Messenger integration, the wiring up of that. We can wire this up to a number of things though at the same time as well. So we could wire this up to Google Assistant. So if you wanted voice automation, we can wire it up to things like Slack or Telegram or Twitter. There's quite a lot of natural integrations built in here, and you can have one chatbot agent that talks to all of these different things, that integrates with all of these different things. One of the cool things, and I'll show you how you can do this as well, is you can actually, some of these things, their messaging will have different features. And we saw that with the Facebook Messenger there, with the way that it showed the 3 options to select from. Not all of the integrations will have that, or will have that in the same way, but Dialogflow is pretty good that it lets you give a default response, and then you can give specific responses. So if you want to make the most out of features for a certain integration, you can, without not at the exclusion of using other integrations. And you can integrate with this with your chatbot agent through an API. So even if there's not an integration here that you can see, you can actually write anything that would do with this through an API. So even things like Alexa or something like that. So the first thing I'll show is entities. So for anybody with an engineering or developer background here, entities are a little bit like enums. It's a way of defining some like a specific range of values. So I've got an entity here called Meetup, and you can see there the main things are tech and data, but I've also got kind of synonyms. So you can say things that are similar. So if you're looking for somebody to give you either tech or data as a response to a question, or you're looking for that token somewhere in the user's message, if they put coding or they put developer, it would tie that into the tech side. If they put database or storage, it would tie that into data. So we're kind of defining a range of values there, and that can give us validation as well. So there are points where it's fairly easy to say if we're expecting the user to come up with one of these things, we can kind of prompt them if they don't give us that information. So if we have a look at intents now, and after setting up your entities, intents are kind of like the main thing in Dialogflow, really. They're called intents because it's about getting the intent of what the user is asking, and gauging what the action, what the response should be to that. So first one I'll go into is the default welcome intent. And any chatbot agent you create in Dialogflow has this. And you can see here that there are a number of what Dialogflow calls training phrases. This basically means if the user types any of these things, then it will be routed to this intent. And if we have a look at the text responses, there are various text responses. So you can see they're all related. So if the user types any of these things, it'll come into this intent. And then the intent will randomly select one of these things to respond. So you're going to want the responses, although it's good practice, like I said, to have multiple slightly different responses for the same thing. It's going to be, the intent of the response will be the same, if you like. It'll mean the same thing, just might be worded slightly differently. So that's the default welcome intent. Another intent you get by default when you create a chatbot agent in Dialogflow is the default fallback intent. So that welcome intent will take all of those things like hello, hi, howdy. The default fallback intent will take anything that the user types that doesn't route to any of your intents that you create. And it will basically ask the user by default, it'll say, can you say that again? You can see there are no training phrases for this, but it's a special intent. You can see there it's got a different symbol next to it, and that's because it's the default fallback intent, and you only have one default fallback intent for any chatbot agent. So beyond those two default intents, the first intent I had to create for this example was meetup types. And it's worth saying, if you are doing this for a real world workflow, then it's worth sitting down with a pen and paper or with a tablet or whiteboard or whatever and just mapping out the workflow of your discussions, how you want those discussions to flow, and have a bit of think about the different ways you think people might ask or might give you the responses, and that'll guide sort of your initial stab at the training phrases. So you can see here I've got a couple of training phrases for this first meetup type. So if anybody asks these two questions, and there is some fuzzy logic as well, it doesn't need to be exactly these questions, but if anybody asks these two questions or something very fuzzily similar, Dialogflow will route it to this intent. The one thing worth mentioning is the contexts. So contexts are how we pass the data through the user's input or other things through the conversation, and that's how we know kind of further on at the end of the conversation that the user selected data earlier on. So you can see there's no input context because this is the first intent in this conversation. But we do have an output context, which is meetup. And one thing to be very careful of is, so I kind of found Dialogflow to be quite brittle when I've worked with it. It's one of these things where it seems to break quite easily, and that might just be me doing things wrong, but it seems to break quite easily, and it can sometimes be difficult to track things down. I'll talk a little bit further on about how to track things down, but one of the gotchas that I would say here that's caught me out is when you're removing something, so if you've got contexts like this, if I click that X there, it takes this meetup context out, and it'll go back to add output context in this case, but that field will still be there. If I click that X, then it takes out the actual field. And if I do that, instead of just removing that at a point where I don't need the output context, then it actually kills the context for the entire conversation. And I'm assuming it's kind of the difference between null and undefined, in that by removing that, it sets it to null. The value that, the property is still there of output context, but it doesn't have a value. But by clicking that one, it removes the property, and that seems to cause problems. Don't know why you would want to remove the whole thing. But just as a gotcha, if you are removing things from these contexts, use the X next to the thing. You'll see a number there as well, and that number is how many points in the conversation do you want this context to carry on for. So because we've got 5 there, this output context will be available for 5 points in the conversation after we've responded to 5 things that the user said. We'll lose this this context. Defaults to 5, and unless you've got long conversations, obviously, you're probably not going to want to increase that. From a security point of view, anything that's quite sensitive, personal information and stuff, you're going to want that lifespan to be as short as possible. You're not going to want it to carry on for any further than you actually need it to. So that's contexts, trading phrases. If we have a look at the responses now, so you can see there, I haven't got a default response for this. I've just gone for a Facebook response. In reality, you're probably going to want a default response for everything, and then your specific integrations. So the reason I've got a specific Facebook integration here is because Facebook Messenger has quick replies, and this is the thing where it had those little tiles that kind of let me select the thing that I want to display. And I don't know if you noticed, but when we actually did the Messenger thing, and let me go back to it now, you'll see that before I came up with the little tiles, it said meetups. The reason for that is that in Dialogflow, the first thing that you put in the quick replies is displayed like that. So the first thing you put in the quick replies isn't an option for the user to select from. It's basically a general description of what category are those options part of, I guess. So that's the response, looking at the Facebook Messenger specific one. So at this point, the user is going to select one of those things. If we have a look at what the next intent is. So the next intent is going to be, it's going to take us to is interested in meetup type. So we need to tie this into whatever the user has just done, or whatever we want to bring the user in at here. So if the user selected data or tech in those tiles, then it'll come in here because it's got data and tech, and you'll see those are yellow. The reason they're yellow is Dialogflow is intelligent enough to know that that's like the entity that we selected, or the entity that we set up earlier. So it knows that this is information that we want to get from the user. And you can see here, if I type in something to say, I'm interested in your tech meetup, it'll bring us into this intent as well. So the user didn't need to start at that other point. If I just start a new conversation and say, I'm interested in your tech meetup or your data meetup, it'll come in here, and you can see, because I've highlighted that it knows that that tech is the parameter, and it tells me what entity type that is. And that's really important, because if I come in here saying, and you can see there's a spelling mistake in that one actually, after technical sessions, or I'm interested in your meetups, and it brings me in here, then because we're saying that we need this parameter at this point, we can prompt for it. So if we have a look at action and parameters, which is something we haven't seen yet, we can see that there is a parameter, and the name is meetup. The entity is meetup, which is the entity type that we set up previously. We're going to say the value is going to be stored in $meetup. So if we want to access this thing, that $meetup is what we need to access it with. And we can see here, we can set up a prompt for this. Not all data might be mandatory, so you might want to have parameters where it's optional, and if you can pluck that out of what the user's typed in, then you'll get it. But for ones that are mandatory, you need to put in a prompt, and it won't let you carry on from this intent. If you've got to this intent, but you haven't got that parameter, then it will loop here. Just keep asking what meetup type you're interested in, and you can have variants on the prompt as well. So if you've asked one thing and the user still doesn't give you the thing that you want back, you might want it to have a varied thing that is slightly different, that hopefully will get the user to input what they want. Down here, so we've got, again, a Facebook specific response, but this one could actually be in default response. There's no reason for it to be Facebook specific, but it basically says, thanks for your interest, I'll need your details, message me with OK when you're ready. And you can see up here we've got context coming in, and we've also got context going out. And the context here our context will be getting more and more information as it goes. So as the context came in, it would just have that tech or data on there. It would have what meetup type people are interested in. As the context goes out, it's going to have that meetup type, and it's going to have actually it's going to be the meetup type. That is the context that's going to be going out at this point. And we can have a look. I'll show you when I'll show you towards the end, after we've looked at the final intent. I'll show you how you can see what context is there as you go through the different stages, and that helps you kind of debug this stuff. So if we go back to the intents, and we now have a look at gather user info, because this is the one that we'll come to. And you can see here the training phrase is OK. So it's going to come in here based on the fact that the user has already is typed OK. So they've been through that other stuff. You can see over the top context, we've got a context coming in. Because this is the final thing in the conversation, we don't have an output context. This is as far as we need the context to go. It's going to come in here at OK, and similar to before, we've got a couple of parameters, but these aren't of the entity type. You can see username is just going to be free text, so we use the built-in @sys.any entity type. And that'll just let the user type in anything. We've got a prompt for that thing. User email, we can be more specific, and we can say actually we want the user email to be sys.email. And what that means is that if the user types in anything that's not an email address, when I say not an email address, there'll be some validation of email address on there. It's not going to check that it's not going to send a confirmation email or anything, and validate that it is an actual email inbox that is configured somewhere and is receiving mail. But it'll check that it's it looks like the format of it satisfies what you would expect for an email address. And if the user doesn't, then it'll prompt them again for their email address. And I've gone for a default response here, and you can see this is where we start mirroring back the things that the user has given us. So we use $username, and you can see that ties into the value that we've given the parameter for username. We've got hash meetup.meetup. So you can see there the parameters we access by the $, the context we access by the hash. And you can see there, how do you know that it's meetup.meetup? So you can see that, like what I'll show you in a second, that you can see what the context is in the JSON when you're going through the actual conversation. And I'll show you how you can do that. And then we have the $user email there as well, which is going to have the user's email in there. Before I show you how to kind of debug and trace through your conversations, let's have a look at fulfillment, because at the minute, all I'm doing is gathering information and mirroring that back to the user. So that's great, but it's not really useful in a real world scenario, because you're probably going to want to harvest this information and gather it and put it into a user store. Or you might want to get something from a user store based on something the user's typed in. So when the user selects data, you might want to say, look at the user store, the data store for kind of like when the next data meetup is, and give the user back that information. Or you might want to store the user email and username in this scenario for so that you can have a list in data that you can then email out and contact whenever you've got a meetup that's happening. So yeah, so you handle that with fulfillment. So if we have a look, if we go into fulfillment, so you can see there we have multiple intents in the conversation. You can only have one fulfillment web service for an entire agent, but you can wire that up to a number of intents. So you can actually have a number of different things being processed in the single webhook or web service, but you'd have to have like a switch statement or something like that in here that works out which intent it's actually in, if it does something different for different intents. You can see here that you can set up a webhook, and basically you just need to create something that the documentation for Dialogflow gives you a very specific JSON request and response for your web service that you would set up as a webhook. Now the easiest way to do it though is, so you could host your own web service and set that up as a webhook, but the easiest way is to just set up a cloud function in Google. So Google's cloud stuff has cloud functions, and actually if you enable this, then it'll automatically create a cloud function, and you can edit that cloud function right here in the Dialogflow console. So it's a really easy way of doing it, and you can see here that's grayed out because it's disabled, but hopefully you can see that there's quite a lot of things in here, examples in here that show you how to work out which intent you're in. It shows you how to add things to the response, and how to get things out of the request. So it's fairly easy to do that. So here's where you're going to want to do that integration with your data store, or go off and call other services or other things in your infrastructure. Once you've got that implemented, back here in intents, you can see each intent has a fulfillment section at the bottom. And basically, if you enable the webhook for this intent, then it will then call that service as it's processing this intent, and it'll let you pull things out of the request, out of the context, and it'll let you add things to the response before it goes out. So you can see here though, you don't say the name of the fulfillment webhook or anything, because there is only one for each agent. So yeah, you're going to have one webhook, and you're going to set that on different intents. That's how you do data stuff. So we saw it working through.
Just a quick one, Phil. Sorry, just got a couple of questions in the chat. I was trying to find like a good point where you were kind of mid tool.
Yeah, I'll go for it.
So I guess start with the top one. So Stu's asking, what about escalation out of the chatbot? Get to an agent in person. If you swear at it lots, will it exit to a person, or, for example, press 0 to exit the automation?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and yeah, definitely something that that people implement. So, like I say, with this integration with Facebook Messenger, there's probably nothing in there that would. There's nothing that I know of in that would let you automatically escalate that to a person. Like I say, if I go into Messenger, because I own that page, I could actually see that conversation that I've just done, and I could respond. And this is where it gets weird, and it's like you're talking to yourself, you know. I mentioned a couple of people who were on the call when we were the organisers, when we had a bit of a pre-meetup session the other day. My wife had a conversation with me where it was like she broached it like she was staging an intervention, and she kind of said later in the day, after when I was preparing all this stuff, she kind of she said to me, I actually had a picture on that page of myself as well, and she kind of broached it quite carefully, and she, you know, I think she thought lockdown was getting to me, and she said every time I was going out for a cup of tea the other day, or earlier in that day, it looked like you were sort of having a conversation with yourself. And because I'm passionate about this stuff, like a lot of people, and I smile when things are working. She said you're like messaging yourself and kind of smiling and just like responding and stuff like that. So yeah, you because I own those two things, I could actually go in and I could take up that conversation from the other side. So you could pick it up later on. In this case, we do that escalation to real agents at BGL, and there's quite a lot of stuff in that overall tech stack. So we use a cloud center in the cloud, contact center in the cloud thing called Twilio, and you might have noticed when we clicked on the integration side of things that there is a Twilio telephony integration here. So yeah, we use Twilio and we use Dialogflow. Like I say, we do that thing where that process that I was talking about with the PCI card payment, it hands over from the real agent to the chatbot agent, and then, you know, there's a point in that automated discussion where we automatically make that call to hand back to the real agent. So it would be the same thing as that, really. But you are starting to get, if you're talking about escalating to a real person, you need some infrastructure there with real people sitting at to deal with it. I mean, what you could do with this is you could actually have, you know, if you own that Facebook page and Messenger, you could have in the fulfillment thing, you could have a thing that pings you if it, you know, if people are swearing and it sounds like they're getting irritated, you could have something that actually messages you directly, so that you could then go into Facebook Messenger and respond as a real person. But yeah, if you're doing it all automatically, you're going to need people sitting there to actually deal with the stuff, and you're going to need infrastructure that allows people to actually pick that stuff up. Regarding the swearing aspect of it, that's really interesting as well, because swearing isn't just the only thing that you can get the intent that the user isn't very happy. You know, if they're repeatedly saying things, if they're typing in caps lock and stuff, there's various things that you can do that that can detect if the user isn't very happy, and yeah, and it's interesting, and AI is very interested in this realm, right? Because if you have if you sell vacuum cleaners, then actually somebody typing into the messenger there saying it really sucks is a good thing, right? But if you sell printers and someone types in saying it really sucks, that's a bad thing. So it can really depend on the context as to whether you think the person is hacked off and stuff. And that's a really interesting one, actually, working out if somebody is irritated. And it can come down to tone of voice and things like that as well. How quickly someone is speaking, things like that, you know. Cool. Does that answer that question?
Feel free to unmute yourself, Stu, if you want to.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the thing is that we all know that within the phone environment, you need to be able to have the ability to speak to someone or help them back off or go to a manager as an escalation. And obviously,
absolutely.
that sort of thing needs to be built into these.
Yeah, and that would actually, so that's something that you would build into kind of like the workflow for your discussions. So things like if we created an intent, so like that example there that you've typed into the chat thing, can I speak to a supervisor please now? We could have an intent that tries to pick anything up in that has the word supervisor in. And then, and in our fulfillment thing, like if we are integrated with something like Twilio, in the fulfillment thing, you know, for that intent, you could absolutely have it so that it hands over to a real person. And yeah, similarly, if you're looking at if the input is keypads, it's no different really. You would just have the input to an intent could be kind of the number, and you could say at the start of the automated discussion, press 9 if you do feel you need to speak to a real person. And I think that question as well kind of really kind of brings into mind the ethical side of this, in that do people actually know that they're talking to an automated person, or do they feel, you know, there's a lot of work in this sphere that to create things that makes people feel like they're talking to a real person. And there's quite a famous, it's quite famous now, it came out about a year ago. It might have actually been Google and Dialogflow that did it. It might have been Google that published this, but it's a discussion where somebody rings up to book, I think it might be a restaurant, it might be a hairdresser's, but somebody rings up to book an appointment, and you listen to the conversation, and actually, if you're a betting person and you knew that one side of that discussion was automated and one wasn't, you would probably bet that the person ringing up was the automated side of it, because the responses actually sound more human than the actual person who's ringing up. But it does raise the question of, you know, should you be clear that someone is talking to an automated service, or do you want to spoof the person into thinking that, you know, they're talking to a real person? My personal side of that is always let them know that it's an automated service, and you know, when they're talking to an automated service and when they're talking to a real person. Does that answer? Cool. I'll take that as a yes. And cool. Was there any other questions? I think at the minute, have you done any integrations for internal services rather than customer-facing ones? Not with Dialogflow, but I have worked somewhere, and Russell Craxford, who's on the call as well, worked at the same place. But we did a similar thing with Slack integrations for deploying software. So there was a thing about like the technical aspect of being able to deploy software, and there was a Slackbot integration written where there was a Slack channel that was integrated with a chatbot agent. It wasn't Dialogflow, I don't think, but you could do exactly the same thing in Dialogflow and have that fulfillment service do this. And basically you went into the thing and you basically typed in, I think it was the thing that you wanted to deploy in a version number, and it kicked off that whole deployment. So yeah, there are things you can do to automate pretty much anything that you can do. You can automate and kick off. You can use this stuff. It doesn't need to be conversational. You can just kick stuff off that's automated with this, you know.
That place we used to work, Phil, which I won't name, they also did it for HR queries and things as well in the end.
Right.
A chatbot in general, just to deal with HR queries internally. That was quite useful.
Yeah, I think it is, and it does. Like I said at the start, it's that thing about you know, it's reliable. It's going to give people the same information. If people ring up with the same question, you're not going to get different people getting different responses depending on who they go to. And yeah, and it, you know, it can be 24 hours a day as well. This stuff, it's automated. I see Gervie has posted a thing about the phone call, which is good. Cool. So I'll quickly move on now to, and we can take more questions as well, but I'll quickly move on. How do you test this stuff, and how do you see the contexts as you're going through? So we saw it in Facebook Messenger, where it was where we saw it typing in, and that's actual Facebook Messenger. But if you want to just test your thing, you don't need to go to any of the integrations. You can use this little box in the top right hand corner. So try it now. So if I type hello in here, that will take me to my default response. And you can see here, I can see the intent that's actually dealing with it. So if we go through the conversation that we were having, so what meetups do you run? And you can see there it's got default response and it's got not available. But if I click on Facebook, it tells me, and this is what I was saying about, you can actually have multiple integrations wired up to the same agent, and you can see all of the agents that you've got, all of the integrations that you've got here. So you can see what all of the different responses would be for the same thing. And this is another gotcha, actually, that when you are testing it out, the first couple of times you're doing this stuff, sometimes you'll type something in and nothing comes up and you think it might not be wired up, but actually you just got to make sure that you are on the integration that you're expecting to see a response for. What I can do is, if I click on diagnostic info down here, it tells me the raw API response, and this is the JSON. And this is what I meant when you're doing the fulfillment service. This is what you're dealing with coming in and going out. You can grab information from this and you can put information into it. And you can see here that it's got it tells you like how long the lifespan is for these things. And you can see here, we don't have any context yet that says what the user's selected. So if I go back here, if I select data, it says, thanks for your interest. I'll need to take your details. Message me with OK when you're ready. Now, if I have a look at the diagnostic info, we can see that actually we have data here. And you can see this is context / meetup, and it's meetup was the value that we're after, and that's how we know previously that it was the hashtag meetup that contains that value. Now if I say OK here, and you can see our contexts are building up. So gather user info, so Facebook Messenger is not available, but I forgot a default response. So what is your name? So I'll put Phil in there. And just to show the email address validation here, so if I put something that's not an email address in, it'll come back with, again, what is your email address? Like I say, you can do various variations of the prompt, but it won't continue until I actually get an email address from the user. And if I put in an email address here, phil.johnson@hotmail.com, and click return, and it gives me back my wonderful message with all of that data in. We can see in the diagnostic info here, there's a load of information in there now. So if you are doing a fulfillment service, actually you don't necessarily need to do that at the various points during the conversation that all these little bits of information are being entered. You can do that fulfillment service just at the end if your context is going through. But like I say, for security purposes, I would only have personal information, and as far as you need it to. You can see here the lifespan count here is down to 4 because we're kind of one step further on. So that's only going to be there for another 4 things in the conversation if there was more. The only other thing I was going to show was training phrases. So as you probably, the burning question in everyone's mind is probably going to be, this is fine, but actually there's kind of one way that we've looked at asking about meetups, or 2 ways if you like. So if we have a look at the intents here, we've got what meetup sessions do you run, and what meetups do you run. Now, what about if I want to ask about technical? Somebody comes on and they phrase things differently, and they might say, "I'm interested in meetup. Well, I'm interested in gatherings. I want to stay clear of meetups because it might actually, the fuzzy logic might bring us in here. But let's just say that back in Facebook Messenger, somebody comes here and they ask for, do you do gatherings of technical people? So it goes to the default fallback intent, and it says, sorry, can you say that again? I can put that in as many times as I want. It's not going to take it. But the hope as well there is actually the user phrases it slightly differently when you ask them to say it again. They don't just copy and paste the same thing again. And that's a tip just for anybody who is involved in in a conversation with an automated service. If you keep saying the same thing, you will get the same response, or at least it'll process the request in the same way. It might give you a variant of the response, but it'll process it in the same way. So try saying things slightly differently. So if we come into training here though, we can actually see that conversation. So we've had a conversation today, and you can see there, do you do gatherings of technical people? And if I click on that, it'll tell me that there was no match. It's gone to the default fallback intent for that. Now, I don't want it to go to the default fallback intent because actually I know that I can deal with that. So what you're going to want to have is anything that's gone to anything that you've not understood. You're going to want to go and have a look at what those different things are, and you're going to want to kind of hook it up to the thing that it should be, or you might want to create a new intent that handles that and possibly then takes the user into further into your own conversation, or it might spark you to create a completely different chatbot agent with a different conversation. But for this one, let's say, and I'll copy that just so that I will show that I can actually ask that same thing again once I've wired it up correctly. So I've had a look to see what people have been asking about the day before, and come in and seen that this is here. So let's hook that up to the proper intent that it should, we think, can deal with that. You can see there it gets the green tick, so let's approve that. And that'll spin for a little bit. And then if I go into Messenger, and am I still sharing there, or have I think I've stopped sharing. Let me share it.
I'm not sharing anymore.
Well, I think I've caught that at the top of the screen. So hopefully that's sharing again now. So if I go into Messenger, oh yeah, my Messenger tab is just right next to the stop share thing. So if I go into Messenger now and type that, and that then brings me into the point of the conversation where I'm at, and that's why it's called training, right? And you can set it so real world, if you're running this as a campaign, you wouldn't want to kind of set up what you think people are going to do and then open it up to, you know, your entire customer base. You're probably going to want to kind of open it up to a select number of customers, possibly even get you know, pay for kind of like UX volunteers or whatever you call them to kind of try out the thing and try talking to it in different ways, and then have a look at the training phrases and wire things up correctly or create new intents for those things. What you can do is specifically with the Messenger thing, so I haven't published this Facebook Messenger thing yet. There's only me who can have a conversation with it. But what I can do is back here in my Facebook for developers, you've got roles and you've got test users. So what I can do is testers. So I could add, say, 5 people I know who are on Facebook as testers, and then they would be able to see this Facebook Messenger app. And they would be, you know, I would ask them kind of, say, I'm doing a conversation about meetups, ask it anything you want about meetups, and then I can see kind of the way different people are asking about meetups in different ways. And then once I'm happy with that, I can open it up wider and I could publish this Messenger app and open it up for everybody. So I think that's everything that I had to go through. So we can go to questions in a second, but I don't think that's like that actually. So that's better. So yes, so let's have a quick summary and then we can have a look at any further questions. So quick summary, use multiple similar training phrases. So you're going to want to reuse your intents as much as possible. So have those different, and people are going to phrase things in different ways. So have as many training phrases as you can, and similarly have as many responses, because it makes people feel like it's more of a human conversation if the next time they come in and ask something similar, they don't get the exact same response. For storing data throughout the conversation, you're going to want to store that in the context, and you're going to have to want to check that your context is being carried through. If you do that thing where you look at the diagnostic info, if your context isn't going all the way through, you're going to want to see at which point in the conversation is it dropping off, and that'll give you an idea as to where your contexts aren't wired up correctly. You're going to want to, for ranges of inputs and for parameters and things, you're going to want to use intents, which will limit the range of inputs and will enable your intents to automatically prompt for something within that range if the user hasn't given you it. You're going to want to use action parameters to gather the user input data, and you can identify parameters within the things that people are saying. And you're going to want to, for that human aspect, the more that you can customize it, per person, the more it feels like they're talking to a real person. And that was it for everything that I was going to show. So hopefully you found that useful and hopefully interesting. Was there any further questions that people had?
So we've got a few questions in the chat. So I guess the first one, so what about business email validation? So can you exclude Hotmail or personal emails, for example?
Possibly. So I think for that, I think you're getting in the realm of having to implement that yourself. But you could absolutely, with Dialogflow, you could do that with the fulfillment thing. And if at the point where you're taking an email address and it's one that you don't want, you could then send them to an intent where it says, we don't take personal email addresses. Do you have a business email address, and maybe give them some information about what constitutes a business email address.
Cool. Okay, and then I guess the next one's kind of sort of 4 questions merged into one. Stu, was there something like specific that you wanted to kind of ask there, or?
So dead letter queues to follow up on queries / trigger a reply and get back to them, respond back and re-engage. Yeah, you could absolutely do that, I guess, with, again, you're getting in the realm where you're implementing yourself. You can actually see, I mean, you can see in that training thing that depending on, how many users you're actually dealing with, you could look through yourself as to what the conversations have been the day before. If you've got 4 or 5, then that's doable. If you've got hundreds or thousands, it's less doable. But you could absolutely be in that fulfillment thing. You could be logging kind of information into your data store as to how far through the user is in the conversation, and then you could have reports and dashboards to say so many people dropped off at this point in the conversation, and you could absolutely print reports on which people that was. Obviously, it depends on if you've got the user's details as to whether you can get back to them. If it's something where you're dealing with further afield, but you could have absolutely you could have reports that look and say kind of this user was having a conversation. They've been inactive for 5 minutes. And that could automatically pass them on to a real agent, and that's where you get these things, right, where you're chatting online to something that's automated, and then suddenly you get a thing and it's obvious a real person has started talking to you.
It's a great idea, so that you could use it for like auto form filling, like put it into a ServiceNow ticket or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that means that all of that original customer validation, they're working on a service desk or whatever, annoys everybody, could be pre-done, and then say, right, I've got your details, can I check this is right, that's right, yes. And if they say yes to all of it, then you've probably cut the phone call down by, I don't know, a third. Of what it currently would have been. And if, let's say, it was in like an insurance environment, you could have them fill all the form in through this, and then say, give us a call back, or I want to discuss my account, this is my issue, here's me stuff, ring back between these times when it's convenient. And then you can have an outbound versus an inbound, but your outbound is with all of the relevant information to hand.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a great point as well when you touched on kind of like how much time that could save on each call, because when you're looking at automation for business case and everything, people love, executive sponsors and stuff love to see the stats on this stuff, don't they? And it makes sense as well, working it out. And this is the thing, right? It's how many calls are you getting, or how many if you're automating something like software deployment, how many times do you do that? How many times do you get that thing on a daily basis? How much time could you save if some or all of that was automated? And how much time would it take to actually automate it? And it just depends where you're going to see that return on investment, as to whether the business case does make sense for that thing,
Right, if you had a pre-form and then say, we're going to ring you back if you do this, then that I would say would probably reduce the call times by at least a half.
Yep.
And then the actual person would turn around and the agent would have a better call because they're engaged, rather
Yes.
than having to do a data protection thing at the front of the call that
Yep.
everyone hates.
Cool. SQL injection and things is, yeah, I mean, it comes down to security. You obviously need to validate this stuff. It's ultimately a serverless function that, or however you implement your webhooks, that you have your fulfillment service or webhook kind of on. So yeah, absolutely. However you would normally secure that from not just SQL Server, it's, you know, SQL injection attacks, but anything else, you would absolutely want to have that that protection, and you know you're going to want to do secure coding in the same way. But yeah, if the user types in, and if you've got a free text field and the user types in something like you know, little Bobby tables kind of you know, drop users table, then yeah, you're going to want to have that in your webhook in the same way that you would if you had a server, had like a serverless function or a webhook that was taking information from an ASP.NET MVC web application or something like that, you know. Errors, so errors are an interesting one. Obviously, you've got your fulfillment service, so you would deal with errors in whatever way you normally deal with errors. So you'd probably log it to somewhere, your logs. And again, this is code you're writing. So however you normally log things, you would write logs like that. And then you would probably want to give if you can't recover, you're probably going to want to send the user to an intent that tells them, you know, something's gone wrong during the conversation on our side. We're really sorry. Try again later. Or you might want to automatically pass them over to an agent if they're not. You've got to be really careful if you do stuff like that though, because if your service goes down and you've got an automated service that's dealing with 1,000 people an hour, say, and you've got enough real agents to deal with 100 people an hour, handing people over when they get errors to a real person could actually cause more frustration if they're then stuck in a queue. So they've been on an automated service, which then puts them in a queue where they'll listen to an on hold message for kind of an hour or something like that, you know. What's the XKCD reference, Claire? I think this might be an obvious one, but it's not something that springs to my mind. Ah, the microphone's gone. Ah, right, yes, yeah. Sorry. So yeah, the Little Bobby Tables reference, for anybody who hasn't seen it, is it's a little cartoon about the principal of the school, I think, is calling a kid's parents up, and he's complaining that the kid's name is like a SQL injection attack, and it has a semicolon in it, and then drop table users semicolon, and yeah, I think Claire has quite conveniently put a link to it in the chat there, and they're saying, yeah, that is his real name. We just call him Little Bobby Tables for short. Cool. What could make it trigger conversation or disclose messenger profiles as part of handover? So is that what could, so if it hands over to a real person, what could make that real person see the details that the user's been typing in so far? If that's the question, then you're probably going to, the way that we kind of do stuff like this at BGL is we're putting information into data throughout a conversation, and then if it hands over to a real user, they can see all of that data. We have there's kind of like conversation IDs and things like that in Twilio that I mentioned. So when it hands over to an agent, we can tie in the integration conversation. We'll have an ID and we can tie that in. So we would, when it hands over to the agent, we would take that conversation ID and we can get, you know, all of the values that we've been storing for that conversation from data, and, you know, pop that up so it's really easy for the user, for the agent to see.
I think we've got time maybe just for one more question, and then we're running up to time a little bit. So I guess that last question there from Stu then. So a person log in as the automated agent or take some of the calls, I guess that is.
All right, so yeah, you could absolutely, and here's where we're getting into kind of, you know, infrastructure and a big tech stack and complex kind of things. But yeah, you could absolutely have something where it only goes to the automated agent when all of your agents are busy. And yeah, so Twilio, Twilio's this contact center in the cloud type of thing, and you can see, you know, you've got, you can see in code kind of how many agents you've got, who's busy and who's not, and you can absolutely automate kind of so if all of the agents are busy, it goes to the automated service, and if anybody becomes free during that, you could have in your fulfillment service, you know, you could be contacting the Twilio API to see if any agents are free now, and if they are, it could hand them back to a real person from the automated service. So that's the overflow thing, and yeah, out of hours, absolutely. You know, the digital voice is kind of a lot of different things will do this. Twilio itself has a built-in kind of digital voice type of service. It's not as complex as some of the stuff that Dialogflow can do. We use both at BGL. Just depends on what the thing is. But yeah, for out of hours, you can absolutely have it so that outside of certain hours, it goes straight to the automated service, but in hours it goes to real people. Cool. Awesome. And I think like I think it was Chris mentioned earlier, you know, if anybody does have further questions after this, if you ping, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. If people want to connect, I'm more than happy to connect. And if people ping me questions, more than happy to respond. And I think Chris mentioned the Any Tech channels as well that people could use to ask questions beyond the meetup tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, big thanks to yourself, Phil. Thought that was really, really interesting. Like as Phil said, you know, any questions, just get in touch. If I'll steal the screen off you just for a minute. So just a couple of things to touch on. So at the start of the meetup, Claire mentioned that she was doing a study on how meetups have changed in this COVID period. There is a link to a survey in the chat, but we'll send that around after this meetup. And yeah, I'm sure should really appreciate if you could just go on there and just quickly fill out the survey. Next month, so we've got Lee Rathbone coming, so testing philanthropist, and he'll be speaking about the future of tech and the role of the mobile phone in kind of today's society now. So yeah, big thanks, Phil. Thank you everybody for coming along. Any questions, get in touch, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Thank you very much, guys.